Last but not least, we have Professor Coblentz Bautch from St. Edward's University of Austin, Texas. And I'm very, very honored to invite her to talk about demons, heroines, or victims, key female figures in early Jewish tradition. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Well, I would like to formally thank the Van Leer Institute and its director, Professor Gabriel Motzkin, for hosting me. And as well, I would like to thank our conference organizers, and Dr. Domenico Agostini and Roy Velazny. And I would also like to extend my gratitude to Dr. Tommaso Tissé, who couldn't be with us. My presentation today, which explores key female figures in demonology, takes up two of the issues put to us by Drs. Agostini and Velazny. First, how people conceive demons and different categories of malevolent beings, and second, the matter of continuity and development, how elements related to demonology were transmitted and elaborated across different periods and among diverse cultural milieux. I begin with an observation that is well known to all of you. When it comes to demonology and the feminine is represented as well as the masculine in the literature and the material culture of the ancient world. Demons are depicted in late antiquity as both male and female. Women as well as men are depicted as plagued by demons and in need of assistance. And ritual practices, both licit and illicit, which manipulate demons, are performed, again, by and for women and men. What interests us today, though, is the longevity and the permeability of various feminine characters, familiar from, but not limited to, the Hebrew Scriptures, whose stories undergo metamorphosis, especially in connection to the demonic. We consider the fluidity around certain primeval figures from the Hebrew Scriptures, fluidity which permits the same female characters within a certain complex to be represented in widely ranging manners. Oops. Sorry for this. So these are our questions that we have in mind. These feminine characters transcending the narrative context are deployed in later traditions to new ends, cast as demons, or as in league with demons, or as victims, or as heroines. Elements which anchored the characters within a narrative context are also typically revisited and recast in service to the traditions which associate the feminine and the demonic in some manner. Thus, we explore especially literary traditions which span centuries and are a witness to different sorts of demonologies, as suggested yesterday by Professor Bohak, as we consider some curious continuities when it comes to female figures associated with the primeval period. Central to this task are late antique traditions with likely earlier roots, which concern Eve and her female descendants. The primogenitress and certain female progeny are reinterpreted from Spartan Genesis text so as to emphasize their story's intersection with malevolent otherworldly beings. In various traditions set in the primeval period, angels associated with Genesis 6, verses 1 through 4, also play a role in the stories of these female figures, though their moral compass is variable. Further, Lilith with Near Eastern roots as a succubus enters into this tradition complex, which circulates in late antiquity. Apart from the traditions in which she appears as a demon, in a later version, she's presented as a first wife of Adam, and in yet later manifestations of this account, she's presented as rejecting his sexual overtures. Another likely related tradition concerns the primeval woman Estera or Istera, who escapes unwanted sexual relations. In these late antique traditions, one observes in the representation of notable literary figures continuity but also key inversions. From one angle, the sheer diversity of interpretations involving these characters and demons is intriguing. But also curious and fascinating to me is that while so many of these representations depict the literary figures in league with the demonic, another stream presents the same women as heroines or as victims. And while the former is especially well known, I wish to concentrate today on the more positive representations, or perhaps tragic representations of these primeval women, especially when it comes to demonology. We begin with but a few traditions associated with Eve. Reinterpretations of the primogenitress, along with those concerning Adam and events in Eden, are plentiful, especially in the late antique period. I can share today only a small sample of these traditions. And when it comes to the demonic in these accounts, I am understanding the category with some breadth, exploring traditions rooted in the Second Temple period where there seems to be fluidity in thinking about otherworldly beings. In the traditions we examine today, it is the wayward angels who give rise to demonic offspring or become themselves malevolent otherworldly figures which are merged in later tradition with demonic personas. With regard to Eve, we recall that in later retellings, the first woman typically is represented as ignorant at best or as a partner of Satan at worst. In many accounts as well, she is often depicted as guilty of sexual misdeeds. For example, the 2nd century CE Proto-Evangelion of James depicts Eve as both deceived and as defiled by the serpent. A comparative tradition also known to the much later Targum Pseudo-Yonatan posits that Cain was the result of Eve's illicit union with Samael, a wicked angel. Eve's female descendants through Cain are equally problematic. Naamah, whose name denotes loveliness, is a sister of Tubal-Cain and is obviously from the line of Cain. Naamah emerges in later writings as a sort of seductress. In the Genesis Rabbah, she's described as playing beautiful music, which leads people to idolatrous practices, or as so beautiful that she led astray the angels of Genesis 6. Similarly, Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, in its retelling of the story of the angels, states that it is the daughters of the Cainites who seduce the sons of heaven. There is also another trajectory of interpretation for both Eve and her immediate female descendants, including echoes of Naamah, where both female figures are portrayed by are pursued by malevolent otherworldly beings and are clearly the more sympathetic figures. Here I look to two Sethian traditions, the hypostasis of the archons and on the origin of the world, found among the works of Nag Hammadi. In both, Eve and her daughter Noria are pursued by wicked archons that recall the sons of God from Genesis 6, 1 through 4. As Guy Strumsa and others have demonstrated, Sethian literature knows well Jewish traditions of the Second Temple period. Also well known is how Sethian literature subverts narratives from the Hebrew scriptures. For example, in the hypostasis of the archons, Adam and Eve are granted the spirit or life that the archons do not possess, but wish that they had for themselves, so that they could dominate humankind. Eve functions as Zoe, or life, Sophia's daughter, and in this account, it is she who awakens Adam and engenders his offspring to become vessels of light. The archons, or exousia, see the female counterpart of Adam and become enamored with her. As they pursue and attempt to grasp her, she becomes a tree, like the myth of Daphne, leaving only her shadowy reflection, which they then defile. The scene also appears in On the Origin of the World. Their archons, wish to possess Eve, the female light being, so that she might be polluted and will not be able to ascend again to the light. Rather, if they can impregnate her, the offspring would come to serve them. As in hypostases of the archons, Eve laughs at their intentions and leaves her likeness beside Adam as she enters the tree of knowledge and remains there. The archons, blind or unable to see clearly, assume the form is truly Eve, and they defile it, unaware that the form is not her true nature. Though the image or carnal nature of Eve bears children, these are not children of the light or spirit. Noria, daughter of Eve and sister of Seth, appears not only from the hypostasis of the archons and on the origin of the world, but is also in the writings of heresiologists like Irenaeus. The origin of Noria's name may have been Na'ara, maiden, a name which fits her presentation as a type of virgin daughter. And the stories from several texts share a similar view of this figure. Birgit Pearson, though, has argued that Noria ultimately derives from Naamah, the sister of Tubal-Cain. In the hypostases of the archons, the rulers come to Noria and tell her that she must render service to them as their mother had. Noria refuses and remarks that, in fact, they did not know her mother, but only their female counterpart. When the ruler comes at her again and demands that she must render service, she calls to the Holy One, the God of all, to save her. She cries, "Rescue me from the ruler of unrighteousness." At that moment, Eleleth, one of the four great angels, archangels, rescues her and teaches her information that she is able then to pass on to generations. In another work called The Thought of Noria, the protagonist is said to have been brought to the heavens or to the heavenly pleroma by four angels so that she is not defiled and remains a virgin. The demiurge, Yaldabaoth Sakla, is punished by being bound and cast into Tartarus below an abyss, which, as Strumsa notes, is like the Watchers in the Enochic literature. While inversion of a biblical narrative is not unusual in Sethian text, one sees already from this example how Eve and her female descendants were represented, in contrast to the less flattering depictions associated with demons and as either victim or heroine. Next, we consider the reinterpretation of daughters of men, which appear in Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. While the biblical tradition does not linger over the women's fate or make much of in the narrative context of their offspring, and typically translated as the mighty ones of old or the men of renown, already in the Second Temple period, elaborated versions of the oblique account are to be found. The most famous, of course, appears in the Book of the Watchers, which most understand to be an interpretation of Genesis as opposed to an independent but related tradition. Acknowledging the multiple strata within the Book of the Watchers, we consider two depictions of the demonic. The sons of heaven from Genesis 6 are presented as both angels and as a class of heavenly being, the Watchers or Irim. In addition to defining further the intentions and the character of the heavenly beings, the Book of the Watchers makes explicit that the angels' liaisons with women result in demonic offspring. The progeny, referred to first as giants, are given in chapter 15 the designation evil spirits. Pneuma poere on earth, which reflects their hybrid nature. These evil spirits are tasked with afflicting, oppressing, and attacking humankind. Later in the narrative, in what is most likely a distinct stratum, the spirits of the angels who mated with the women are described by Uriel as having the means of assuming different forms and as misleading humans to sacrificing to demons as to gods. While the Greek term daimonia as lesser or intermediate divine beings is rather ambiguous, polemical use of daimonia as malignant or hostile forces may be possible as well. While the Aramaic of 19:1 is not extant, one sees how the Septuagint uses daimonia to translate shedim in Deuteronomy 32, verse 17, a text Professor Shaked shared with us yesterday. It is far easier, though, to connect the offspring of the fallen angels of the Enochic tradition with demons by means of the apotropaic texts that are extant at Qumran. One thinks, for example, of the Songs of the Sage, 4Q 510, 511, which references various sorts of destructive otherworldly beings, including the spirits of the bastards, a probable allusion to the offspring of the Watchers, called also in the Enochic text Mamsarin. As for the women in the Book of the Watchers, the Greek text of 1 Enoch 19:2 suggests the women become sirens, perhaps hinting at the transformation of the mythic figures into either the temptresses of Greek mythology, who woo men to their doom, or there is another possibility for interpreting the Greek term here. Sirens also became associated with mourning and with the singing of dirges for the dead, as is communicated well by these mid-4th century statues of mourning sirens from the cemetery in Kerameikos. As companions to Persephone, sirens also had a connection to the netherworld and may in fact come to symbolize the souls of the dead. Though they may still be understood within the Enochic text as mothers to a race of demons, these women are by no means demonized by this particular reading. Instead, they appear pitiable or as victims. Finally, we come to a much later stream of tradition dubbed the Midrash of Shemihaza and Azael. Shemihaza and Azael are names that are familiar from the Book of the Watchers, and this Enochic work that we considered earlier, as the leaders of the rebellious angels who decide to descend and mate with women. In the Midrash of Shemihaza and Azael, however, there are additional aspects of the angel's story that are worthy of consideration. Oops. I'm going to come back to that slide, my apologies. The Midrash appears in 4 sources that range from the 12th to the 17th century. Of these, Milik prefers Bodleian Manuscript B, which contains a collection of treatises compiled by Eliezer, son of Asher ben Levi, from around 1325 CE. In the Midrash, Rabbi Yosef responds to a question concerning Shemihaza and Azael. He sets his explanation of these two beings in the time of the deluge, when God grieves the creation of humankind because of their corruption. 2 angels, Shemihaza and Azael, remind God that they had indicated the shortcomings of humanity some time ago. To recall the psalm, "What is man that you are mindful of him?" God responds with sympathy for the world. Further, the divine charges that the angels, were they on earth, would fare no better than humankind, and would be ruled by the evil inclination as well. The angels ask that they might ascend to earth and to show how they sanctify God's name, and to show how they would sanctify God's name, and that's a boast that is also found in the Pseudo-Clementine homilies. Here the account associates the descent of the angels with the event that's described in Genesis 6, 1 through 4, which concerns the sons of heaven mating with the daughters of men, much like the Book of the Watchers. Then the Midrash focuses on the deeds of Shemihaza, who sees a girl named Estera, or Istera. He propositions her, but she rebuffs him, until he teach her the name that he uses to ascend to the firmament. Shemihaza teaches her the name, which she then promptly says, and she uses to ascend to the firmament. God appears at this point to comment that since the woman departed from sin, that she should be set among the stars. Thereafter, she shines brightly amid the 7 stars of the Pleiades, so that she might always be remembered. As for the angels, we read that Shemihaza and Azael then go on to take wives and to sire children. Shemihaza eventually repents after being confronted by Metatron, and he suspends himself between heaven and earth with head downward. The Midrash is dated at least to the 11th century when Moshe Hardashan of Narbonne composed the Genesis Rabbah Meor. Millet thinks the origins of the tradition are earlier, though, and obscure. For example, 9th and 10th century Karaites report on the works associated with Uzzah and Azael, angels which descend from heaven, whose names are familiar from the Talmud, the Pesikta Rabbati, 3rd Enoch, and the Zohar. A similar midrash appears in Sefer Hadar Zikenim in reference to Genesis 6:2 and Genesis 28, verse 12. In this account, the angels descend to earth, encountered a maiden, and ask her for sexual compliance. The maiden asks them to give her something in return, and they offer her their wings and the ineffable name. And when given the wings and name, she immediately flies to the heavens. God proclaims that since she fled from sin, the virgin shall have a name among the constellations, as the constellation Virgo. As for the angels who gave up their wings, they can only return to the heavens via the ladder or the staircase, to heaven of Jacob's dream. Yalkut Shimoni, contributing to Milik's midrash of Shemihaza and Azael, offers a slight variation on the tradition as well. Yalkut 44 has Shemihaza being mocked by Ishtar. Ishtar here recalls the astral imagery associated with the woman, as the name Ishtar is often associated with Venus. In fact, certain of the magic bowls to which we have been introduced by Professors Jacquet and Morgenstern include the name Ishtar and Aphrodite, also associated with Venus, though in these contexts the figure is associated with the demonic. In speaking about the identity of demons in the magic bowls, Erica Hunter describes such feminine personas thus. Quote, Venus was, of course, the Hellenistic counterpart to the astral connotations of the Mesopotamian goddess Ashtart, the Ishtar of Acadia, whose title had, by late antiquity, degenerated into a generic term. Yet the drawings on the incantation bowls depicting the erstwhile goddesses recall through their iconography their origins within the Mesopotamian matrix. To this mix, one must also add Ishtar-Lilith demons in the magic bowls. You saw this coming, right? The account is also known in Muslim traditions. The Quran refers to the angels Harut and Marut, which are associated either with teaching humankind magic or with testing and trying humans. As these angels are sometimes set in the time of Idris, Enoch, they resemble also the angels Shemihaza and Azael, who are charged with teaching humans magical arts. In a Quranic commentary of the 9th or 10th century, Al-Tabari refers also to Harut and Marut as two angels who are critical of humankind and therefore descend to earth so as to convict them. A Persian contemporary of Al-Tabari, Ibn Kathir, relays also the Musnad of Ibn Hanbal that when the two angels descended, they approached Venus and they wished to lie with her. Venus responds that she will not until they utter the words of association against God, which is to shirk, associating God with another being, and the worst sin. They decline, but Venus continues to name other possible exchanges that are meant to test the angels. An interesting inversion, right? When the angels finally drink wine, they communicate to the woman the word that they use to ascend to heaven, and then they also commit all the sins from which they had previously abstained. The angels are punished subsequently, hung upside down or placed in a pit outside of Babylon, and the woman is placed in the heavens as the planet Venus, due to her beauty. And yet another iteration of the tradition occurs in the alphabet, or the Otiot of Ben Sira, involving the first human, Adam, and wife named Lilith. This anonymous work consists of proverbs in Hebrew and Aramaic and Agadic material, and is dated from the 8th to the 11th centuries. The alphabet of Ben Sira recounts a tradition where God makes a woman out of the earth for man when God realizes, here intersecting with Genesis chapter 2, 18, that Adam is alone. The first partnership is not ideal, however, and Adam and Lilith fight. In fact, Lilith refuses to have sexual relations with the man and to be under him. Adam demands that she is to be underneath of him since he is the superior one. Lilith responds that since both were created from the earth, they are equal. Finally, Lilith pronounces the ineffable name and flies into the air. Adam complains to God that the woman he gave him ran away. Though angels pursue Lilith, she asks to be left alone, swearing on the name of the living God. She also requests that she be allowed to cause illness to infants unless she sees the names of God or of the angels on amulets. Here the account juxtaposes Adam with the maiden, though angels figure into the story later, and comparable to the other accounts we've discussed, are not allowed to harm or capture the woman. The story also involves sexual relations and the woman's desire to avoid them. The woman does not trick Adam, though she uses wit in reminding Adam of their common origin. Moreover, the woman escapes by means of the divine name, flying away. And though Adam complains, Lilith seems to have the divine approval because she's not forced to return to him. The figure Lilith is an interesting one. Though linked here and in other traditions with Adam, Lilith does not appear in Genesis. Instead, one finds Lilith in Isaiah 34, verse 14, as some sort of creature, which, along with owls, wildcats, jackals, and satyrs, frequents wilderness or abandoned haunts. Other Second Temple works suggest Lilith to be a demoness whose name also appears in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Not only the Dead Sea Scrolls, but also the Bavli Talmud and Babylonian magic bowls. There are other forms of the name as well, as it appears in the plural, Liliot, and it can refer to a class of male demons, Lilin, etc. A selection from Eruvin presents Adam after expulsion from the garden, begetting ghosts and demons, Lilin and Liliot, as a result of separation from his wife and as a result of nocturnal emissions. Does the association with Adam and Eruvin suggest the view of Lilith presented in the alphabet of Ben Sira? It's difficult to say from these two instances. Still, a reference to the wings of Lilith in Bavli Nida and the images of Lilith as a type of bird or winged figure in the Babylonian magic bowls might have facilitated the merging of the traditions involving a demon and that of a woman who escapes via flight. There's one other variation on the tradition that bears reciting. In some of the legends in which the angels are named Uzzah and Azael, the woman is called Naamah. And Naamah, of course, is the name of one of the daughters, one of the descendants of Cain, the relative of Tubal-Cain from Genesis 4, whom we earlier discussed. With these varied but clearly related attestations, can more be said about the provenance of this tradition of the one who escapes? Max Grunbaum speculates, especially given the astral imagery associated with the woman, that there may be a connection between this story and the Greek myth of Pleione, the mother of the Pleiad nymphs, who is pursued by Orion. It is also the case that Guy Strumse has followed this tradition through stories relating to Isis. But in the interest of time, I will not repeat these. In conclusion, we've examined a variety of traditions which range from the Second Temple period to the Middle Ages, traditions which reinterpret in comparable ways feminine characters of the primeval period. The representations of Eve, her female descendants, the daughters of men, and the figure Ishtarah and Lilith are familiar in the following respects. In one trajectory, they are figuratively demonized, but also associated explicitly with demons. In another trajectory, they are presented as victims, typically of malevolent otherworldly beings, as heroines, and in the case of Estahar, even as a trickster figure. The female figure is pursued sexually, but using wits finds a mean to escape. These observations lead me to the following questions. Do the contrasting traditions recall the pluriform nature of folklore and in some cases, etiologies. Is there some dialectic at work between the cultural milieu as concerns not only reading of the sacred text, but also views of the feminine? And is there some purposeful denigration of traditions that occur through the association of certain feminine figures with the demonic? While these questions may not be answered today, I appreciate that the conference has provided us with the opportunity to contemplate these rich parallels and how they might complicate in a helpful way a study of the feminine within the context of demonology. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the floor is open for questions. Sam? Sorry, I didn't. Okay. Sorry, Sam.
The fact that she is running away from a man, which is a result of it would be no children, no babies. Could it be maybe the background for using Lilith as a cameo or a kind of a talisman for women giving birth, which is very, very common in Jewish tradition?
It's perfect. It's a perfect, I think, response in terms of trying to understand. I appreciate so much your comment. I think you're on target. I think that certainly helps to explain why Lilith would have been a useful figure for such apotropaic devices. It's good.
Sam?
Thanks very much. I'm wondering if in any of the midrashic discussions of Istara, the story of Esther also comes up, because there's a connection with the names, but also structurally in terms of the narratives, both the trickster aspect and using sex to ascend to a kind of hierarchy, there seems to me to be parallels. I'm wondering if the rabbis also make that connection.
I haven't found that yet, but I'm headed in that direction. In fact, in terms of my own thinking about this tradition and looking for maybe an earlier stratum, I was thinking about the story of Susanna. And I don't know if you know this from the Septuagint, but there it's a woman who's pursued by these two elders. And now it's not she that is able to affect her own salvation in this context. It's the wise Wunderkind Daniel here. She is preserved. She's described as righteous. And so I thought about that tradition, and I also thought about the woman in Revelation chapter 12 who's pursued by this dragon. It's named later on in Revelation 12 as Satan or Diabolos. But at one point she sprouts wings and soars to the wilderness. So I was thinking about those traditions as well, wondering if there was any sort of comparison to be made, but I like very much this the suggestion that maybe there's more to be found in the stories of Esther.
In a demythologized context, but structurally, yeah.
Thank you.
Any other question?
No, just a reference for Lilith. I'm sure you are acquainted with the story of Solomon, who uses his seal to
The Testament.
chain her. Yes, the Testament of Solomon, yeah.
Thank you.
And it's also connected to stopping her from disturbing women giving birth as well. So it appears in this connection as well.
And truly, I didn't have the opportunity to do as much with the Lilith traditions here today. I had to make a decision because not only with Lilith, but also with Eve, the Eve traditions, there's so much. So I thought what I would do is, it seems to me, more times than not, we're familiar with the demonized version of these characters or figures. And I wanted to try to show something else, that there seems to exist at the same time in contemporaneous works another trajectory where these are feminine figures who are in some way pursued. They are potentially going to be abused, and in some way they seem to have a divine mandate to escape that abuse.
A feminist approach.
Thank you. Thank you.
Question, remarks? I have a question. I don't know if it's really a question. I was thinking about Arut Vemarut. Can you say something further, something more about how these two figures that you know that are Iranian, Ordad and Amurdad, integrity and immortality that we find also in some, if I don't remember now, I don't remember precisely the sources. Also in Armenian sources, they are the helper of Spandarmad, that she's the god of earth for Zoroastrians. And I would like to know how these two Zoroastrian beneficent and entities become fallen angels. Why?
I don't have as much to say on this. Actually, I think I'm in the right setting where others could respond more thoroughly to the comment or question that you're making, though I can say that one of the parts of my paper I didn't read aloud. I just mentioned briefly that Yosef Milik, he also did make this connection between Harut and Marut to Zoroastrian Amisha Spenta. He made also this connection, and also I think he explored this tradition from the angle of a wicked angel that's suspended in the firmament, which can be found in Manichaean tradition. So I realize that there are other strands or threads I could have followed, but I'm curious to know, in light of the expertise of so many of you, what might you say about Harut, Marut, and then this connection to Zoroastrian tradition?
If someone have a good answer, we are here for hearing. No answer. It will remain an answer question. And any other question or remarks?
No answer, but they are indeed mentioned in the Quran, but this is a very specific passage. In fact, I did not discuss it in my own lecture because it is really apart to anything else. It doesn't enter the general demonology of the text. So there are probably indeed Iranian sources, but it seems in the Quran, as far as we remember, that they are not necessarily evil. I mean, there are they tell people to be believers. So there is a change. I mean, in the story, the demons are using them to deceive humans. But how it came about, I don't know. I know Patricia Krohn has written about this, but I'm not sure I'm convinced by what she wrote in this paper. So I really have to think about it. But it's a strange situation because they really appear in one verse, and you have no parallel idea or passage elsewhere in the Quran to the story of Harut and Marut. So how did it come there? It remains quite mystery.
Question, remarks? Last call? No. Thank you very much.